Hello, welcome back to Dad's Planning Politics. Nice to be back with you and nice to see you, Freddie.
Nice to see you as well, although we do live together, so I do see you around from time to time, even when we're not on the podcast. But yeah, very nice to see you, Dada. Yeah, welcome back, guys. As usual, we'll do like a little disclaimer that all of the views and opinions that we express throughout the podcast are personal opinions. Please don't take them too seriously, and please, if you have any questions about any of those opinions, about how we think or about how the issue is being portrayed in the media, please reach out to either of us because we'd love to discuss it, and we appreciate all interests that you may have. So today we're going to continue on from some of the topics we were talking about last week. We were talking about, of course, Iran and the fallout of that. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the Labour government and what they've been doing with the fuel prices, etc., etc. So, yeah.
So should we start with Iran and the latest? You know, it's every day there's new news. There's a big announcement happening from Trump, US Wednesday evening time. It's Sydney Wednesday afternoon time, so tomorrow for us. And supposedly Anthony Albanese is going to be making an address to the Australian people as well, which is quite unusual about Iran and what's happening. So that will be also interesting coming in the next 24 hours or so.
I thought Albo was making an announcement on the fuel prices.
Could do, but I don't know, you know, it could be anything, but it's unusual to make an address to the Australian people.
So at the moment, as in, let's just make sure we don't clarify exactly what it is. It could be an announcement about a number of things. We're not sure. We're just hypothesizing. So just don't take that.
Stock market is reacting badly to Iran and the raising of fuel prices around the world. So I feel like they're starting to not believe Taco Trump changing his mind on these things. So, you know, it's interesting because there's lots of voices coming out of Trump and Hegseth, etc., saying they're soon going to be leaving Iran in the next week or two. And the problems with the Straits of Hormuz is up to the rest of the world because it doesn't really impact the US that much because they're much more self-sufficient on oil.
Now they have
Venezuela, and they also have a lot of shale oil that they've drilled over the last few years. But of course, Asia and Europe and Australia and every majority of the rest of the world are very, very dependent on this. So it's kind of bizarre because the US has gone into this war with Israel and didn't ask anyone else's opinion, then wanted everyone else to join them. And fundamentally, everyone else has fundamentally said no. And now it's as if Trump is now the kid wanting to take his toy home and say, well, you fix up the mess. The rest of you, the rest of the world, you can police the Straits of Hormuz and etc.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think even from the domestic point of view, he didn't go according to normal legal procedure of starting a war, right? There are certain actions you have to do in Congress and certain approvals you have to get. That didn't happen.
Okay, for the latest invasion of southern Lebanon, you know, and again, Israel's done this in the past. Supposedly they're trying to have a safety zone for Hezbollah, but I mean, it just seems like this is a repeat of what they've done in the past, and of course many people are being killed, and again it seems like Netanyahu doing this to improve his re-election chances. It's rather depressing, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot more to it than that, but I'm not sure if the news sources that you're looking at are necessarily telling you the things that my news sources are telling me, because I think that we do read different.
And what are your news sources telling you?
Well, the BBC actually is telling me something other than this.
Yes.
I'm sure that maybe a few of you have heard this, that Israel has said even after the war against Hezbollah has ended, once they've defeated Hezbollah, they are going to maintain a presence in Lebanon. They are going to take the land 30 kilometers north of the land border, and they are going to have military control over it, and they're ordering evacuation of all the Lebanese population within that land. That's after Hezbollah has been defeated. So I ask you, right, what is the intention behind that? If Hezbollah is no longer a risk, then who are you trying to protect yourself from? The Lebanese population? Which is strange because, as we've seen, the Lebanese government has done as many measures as they can, you could say, to restrict Hezbollah's movements. They've banned them. They've launched some police action against them. But I do think it's a difficult situation for them, right? Because they could descend into civil war if they fully confronted Hezbollah on, on a large enough stage. So they've been restricted by the threat of that, but they have openly come out against them many a time and do not agree with anything they're doing. I mean, again, they're an Iran-funded proxy group. They are not a Lebanese group by any means. So Israel is essentially just claiming territory. They're essentially just trying to create Greater Israel. If we look at Russia, I think is a very similar type of territorial accumulation like we see in Russia. It's not like China. China has a different method that they like to use. They like to invest in the economies and the infrastructure of other countries and become powerful and influential enough that those countries are kind of like become very Chinese and become very dependent on China, but through a very subtle.
So far. Let's hope that continues.
Yeah, that's true. In a structural way, in an investing, financial based way. But Russia, obviously, as we've seen, has just invaded land and claimed that land in order to protect themselves from their surroundings. They think they need more of a territorial buffer. And that's what we're seeing with Israel. It seems that there is no end in sight to how much of a buffer they need between them and the surrounding countries, and where will it end?
And I think they're just taking advantage of the world being distracted by Iran and everything else, and they have permission to do it because Russia's done it, the US has done it, so why not them?
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, that is the world order or lack of order that we are living in today. It astounds me that they have the military and soldier capacity to do this, multiple wars on multiple fronts. Even with all their funding, etc., it must be pushing the military to the limit, right? Because 150 sorties over Iran, and this is really pushing the limit of even Israeli military capability.
I mean, you would think that, especially as missiles are heading towards Israel, even at this moment. There's a Kuwaiti missile heading towards them, and they're having to engage their missile defense systems. They're having to spend a lot of money and a lot of resources on just defending themselves. So to be in a position, where you're also on the attack on multiple different fronts is alarmingly powerful.
There was one positive story I heard this week was Zelensky went to Saudi and has inked an agreement with the Saudis in terms of the Ukrainian drone technology and defense against drones, which the Saudis obviously today are very interested in and investing in that. And so that was really good. And it was somewhat of a security agreement, which is fantastic because the Saudis have a lot of money. And, if the Ukrainians have really innovated greatly in terms of the use of AI and drone technology and defensive technology, and they're now one of the most skilled in the world on this stuff. So the Saudis suddenly think, well, that's rather good. And I heard the US administration was kind of annoyed with Ukraine for doing it without their involvement and all that stuff. But welcome to the new world that the US has fashioned themselves.
Yeah, definitely. There are no rules. There's no one in charge. It's just whatever you can get the guts up to do, it feels at this moment. And look, I think it is, again, it's another reminder of how weak the old world is in the fact that with the invasion of Lebanon and with everything else that's been happening recently and everything else Israel's been doing, they've just made it legal to execute Palestinian prisoners, prisoners who have committed traitorous crimes against Israel. So they've made that legal, and that's based on the discrimination of race. And the UN Human Rights Commission has come out and said that, of course, that is a war crime and that goes against international law because you can't make a law based on race, obviously, because you're putting them in a worse situation. So all of this happening, and the only response we get from the rest of the world is, Mark Carney says he strongly disapproves. Europe say they strongly disapprove and that it's a violation of international law. UK says that. They say it, but are there actions being put into place? Are there sanctions? Are there exclusions for Israel from other important events, like even the Olympics? Think about this. They're not being excluded from these international events and these international organizations. And that's what's really going to make a difference, not just some pretty words to placate your population.
I know, but that would require the world security order and United Nations to be functioning, and it's not, fortunately, at this point.
Sanctions don't require the world security
It
order to be functioning.
coordination.
I can't.
Amongst all the countries.
With the great power situation that we have going on, sanctions are very much a huge part of it.
I get it, but everyone
Trump
needs to
has
be
done
coordinated on those sanctions. You can't just have one or two countries doing it. You see what I mean? Who's going to coordinate it?
I understand that, but I think that's the whole what's it called? That thing where the failure. You know, where everyone, the failure of the commons, tragedy of the commons.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. I think still that Canada and the UK, if they got together and chatted about it, and Australia, if we were willing to do anything, have the power to get together and say, let's put sanctions on Israel, even without the US.
I get it, but Tani has been going around the world, and so they've had some time. They should have come up with a middle power strategy. But again, it's difficult for these countries to get beyond their immediate political reality and think strategically beyond that. You even put yourself in Albanese's shoes, right? He's scared enough about dealing with the fuel crisis, let alone agreeing on terms with Mark Carney and other people, other countries, to say, here's our agreement on this. This is quite a strategic thing to achieve.
Yeah. And that fear is exactly what Trump wants, though. Because the bravery that you have is all he wants to be impressed, and I think even to back down. I would argue that if these countries came out and really stood up against him and did what they wanted, you could even say like Mamdani. Mamdani has the opposite of Trump's policies, but does Trump respect him? Yes,
I totally agree with you, Freddie. I just don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I just don't think they're ever going to get it in their heads that that's what needs to be done. Or they're going to have enough people supporting them that they take initiative and do something new. They're stuck in their old ways, and they're excellent at the older ways, but they just don't matter anymore.
The challenge is how this impacts the world, right, in terms of moving the world potentially into a recession and countries into recession. Fuel prices through the roof. Some countries who don't have fuel security are not functioning in these economies anymore, and making people's lives far more stressful. Raising interest rates in Australia, likely another interest rate rise. House prices are stabilising, if not falling. You see, it's incredible, the interconnectedness of the world and the impact on the world economy of these sorts of things. So it's really uncharted territory.
It's definitely uncharted territory, and yeah, it seems like everyone has a license to kill, I would say, nowadays. That's a interestingly picked a reference to James Bond, which I don't know if is maybe the time to be referencing James Bond, but I think that's gotten to the point where everything seems so dire that I find my only way to cope with it is the jokes I see on the internet.
Oh, and the other interesting aside was it's been confirmed King Charles's trip to the US. There was lots of discussion about whether that would go ahead or not, given how nasty Trump has been to Starmer and critical of the UK's Navy, etc., which probably has rights to be critical, because I hear they've only got one or two ships that are in operational order, which is shocking to think, right? Because
from the greatest
the
Navy
UK
in the world.
used to have the greatest Navy in the world. This is just an embarrassment, and they had to, in order to meet their NATO requirements, they had to borrow a gunship from Germany to meet their NATO requirements, because their one operating, destroyer was in the Middle East or out in Australia or something. It's really a tragic state of affairs. And so the whole lack of positivity from the UK government and their annus horribilis is continuing for Keir Starmer. I just think it just seems so pathetic and so negative. I feel bad for him.
Yeah, look, I think it is an interesting choice, but I guess to put yourself in King Charles' shoes, not that I would ever, but to put yourself in that situation, I guess you're hoping that you could have some kind of influence over him, rather than cutting him off and causing him to turn even further against the UK. It's the one thing they've got going for them.
It is interesting to me because the UK seems very weak in this sense. The The Spanish are being very hard-nosed on this and saying the US cannot use Spanish airspace. The Prime Minister, I forget his name.
Oh,
You probably know.
no, damn. No, you put me in a bad position.
Anyway,
I should know this.
You should know that. But he was interviewed the other day and I was very impressed with him. And even Macron, the French have actually a very good navy and very good military forces.
And army bases across the world.
Yeah, and
right?
Macron seems, even though he doesn't have much time left as president, he seems very positive and quite strong in his discussions of this.
Yeah, I actually, this is a side note, but I fear for a time when Macron is not the leader of France, because I think he's been the only sense of stability that we've really seen in Europe since the days of Angela Merkel. So it really does feel like a huge loss, the idea of him leaving power. But yeah, the Spanish government is famously very progressive, the government in power right now, and they have been for a while. They're very socialist. So they've come out strong against Trump from the beginning. They came out strong in support for Palestine since the very beginning. Right. Since 2024, they said that they recognize Palestine and Palestinian statehood when no one else did. They were the first country to do that. So, that is very much in line with their politics. And yeah, I'm not surprised at all. But it is funny how the UK, obviously, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, will openly go against Trump and say he doesn't agree with the war in the Middle East, but then he'll let the Americans use the UK army bases. And it's like, that seems incredibly ironic. You're not exactly holding your line there, are you? And you're letting Trump treat you terribly, but you're not getting the benefits.
And he's scared of reform and he's scared of surviving as Prime Minister. It all comes from a personal point of ego and whether they have the courage to stand up and how they're feeling politically.
Yeah.
Whereas the Spanish Prime Minister is feeling very confident because he's very popular and therefore he can be braver and, more clear on his policies.
Definitely, for sure. But yeah, there's a lot going on and I'm sure we'll have more updates for you. One more thing, sorry to interrupt. One more thing I just wanted to say, what are your predictions for the next 2 weeks? Going into Iran and what the US is going to do and why they're pulling out. Do you really think they're going to pull out in 2 weeks?
Yes, I think they're going to pull out within 2 weeks. I don't think they're going to put boots on the ground. I think they'll declare victory in his Trump's mind that, they've degraded the Iranian capability and the nuclear thing, and it's up to the Middle East and NATO and other countries to keep the Straits of Hormuz open. Because I think he's worried because he's getting closer and closer to the midterms and he needs clear air between that, and already his popularity is very poor. But, yeah, that's my prediction, but nothing would surprise me.
Yeah, look, I agree that I think they'll pull out, but I'm worried about what they're going to do before then. Because I don't know about you, but I don't think that they're just going to suddenly pull the military out of the Middle East with no big push before that. I think there's going to be a massive offensive before they pull the army out, right?
Of what?
As a final...
Karg Island taking control of the
potentially, but
a
final nail in the coffin. Well, do you want to tell these people what Karg Island is?
Well, Karg Island's the major oil processing zone of Iran. It's called Karg Island. And the majority of the oil gets processed there for Iran. And there was talk of the US taking it over, which is bizarre, right? Because this is Iranian territory. And do they think Iran is not like Venezuela? They're not just going to sit down and go along with what the US did. There'll be guerrilla attacks, etc. And the scary thing for me, and mainly for residents of the Middle East, if you think about Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi, and UAE, 80 to 100% of their water is from desalination. Okay? If Iran bombs those desalination plants, it's a humanitarian crisis. They don't have water, right? I mean, you just think about those countries and their contingencies for that. It's much worse than bombing the gas and the oil, right? That's bad enough. But if they destroy the desalination plants, and that's if I'm in Saudi or UAE or Qatar, that's what I'm really worried about.
Yeah, definitely. And we did...
we talked about that.
Pause. We did talk about this.
Shall we move on to Australia? I'm sorry.
Wait, you can cut this bit out.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say something else. Wait, now I can't remember what I was going to say. Oh, yeah, I remember. Yeah, I just think that in order to really make a point and for Trump to be able to tell his colleagues and the rest of America that they've really damaged Iranian's nuclear capacities, they're going to have to launch a few more missiles. They're going to have to kill a few more people. And I just wouldn't be surprised if the civilian casualty list goes up a lot more in the next 2 weeks than it already is. And I really worry for the people of Iran, right? Like these poor people, right? They've gone through a lot. They've been part of this regime for such a long time, had no freedom, no powers, and now they're being attacked by these foreign powers that maybe some of them hoped would secure their freedom in some capacity. So it's a difficult position, and I think they're very much still in danger from the US and Israel, and we don't know what's going to happen there. So we'll see over the next 2 weeks.
And so if you think about the implications for Australia and many countries, there's the fuel crisis, lots of petrol stations are without diesel and various fuels, etc. So the government was being criticised for not moving quickly enough. And I think, again, this is Albanese's caution, but he did get the National Cabinet together, which has often happened during COVID times, all the state premiers and his key people. And they've actually built a strategy, which I'm rather pleased about, right? They have a strategy, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, in terms of difficulty, in terms of supply of petrol, etc. They've given carte blanche to people to spend whatever's required
Do you guys want one?
required.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot.
Whatever's required to make sure that petrol flows to farmers, etc., and essential services and all of that. So I think the plan is really good. And they've said to our negotiators, spend whatever you need to get the fuel and petrol shipped to Australia. So it's really, really good. And there's some state governments like Victoria and Tasmania who've put public transport for free to encourage people to move to public transport and not use their cars, etc. I think, for me, that's a little bit of overkill because, that costs the state a great deal of money to do that. And the federal government has cut the excise by 50% on fuel, so that's reduced the price of the Bowser by 25 cents a litre or thereabouts. So I think it's a pretty good plan. I give the government credit for coming up with it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a good plan. I think that the reason the New South Wales government gave was that our transport prices are already pretty cheap. Look, I actually agree with that in comparison to some of the other states. I know, at least in Melbourne, I know that their prices for using the trams, of using the buses, are a lot higher. They have a $5 standard rate for every trip that you take. So if you change trams, then you have to pay $5 per tram.
Oh, really?
Yes, it's actually quite a high transport fee. Anyway, maybe that's something that they should be changing more long term rather than just this short term band-aid over the top of it. But yeah, it's great they're actually doing something about it, and really feels like they're trying to help the average consumer.
The other big thing is we should be using this crisis to adjust our taxes on gas exports and mineral exports, which have gone through the roof, the prices of those. And so that extra windfall gain should come back to Australia. If you think about Norway and their sovereign wealth fund, which is all from their oil riches, it's shame on Australia that we don't have as big a sovereign wealth fund from the taxes we could have charged on our mineral exports and gas exports, etc. So again, I think this is a big, big issue. I hope we see it in the upcoming budget, because I think there's an opportunity for Jim Chalmers to really be brave with this budget and use this crisis for an advantage to really adjust the way we do things. So I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and I mean, the important part of that whole story is Poe. David Pocock, the senator for the ACT, is doing excellent things, and he's the one really bringing this into the focus point of Australian governance right now. And I think that David Pocock does have, just to end on, have a particularly interesting role in Australian politics. He's very respected by the average punter for being the Australian rugby captain. So he has that place as a classic Australian bloke, but he's actually very progressive on a lot of his views. He hasn't come out to talk about foreign affairs as much, but he talks a lot about the environment, and he talks about, putting the right taxes on our exports. And that's some of the real day-to-day stuff that he can really make a difference on. So it's interesting, I think, we talked about Allegra Spender last week, to talk about these independents and how they're really changing the game of Australian politics and pointing out the inadequacies and failure of the big parties to make any real change. It seems they spend their whole time arguing and disagreeing with each other in the party rooms rather than actually making a difference. So it's really inspiring to see, I would say.
In fact, that's a good idea. Let's try and get Allegra Spender and David Pocock on this podcast. At some
Sounds
point
good.
Over coming months.
Next podcast you see, both of them
Not
will
next,
be here.
but let's work on it.
Yeah.
All right, thanks everyone. Good to see you. Have a
Nice
great
to
week
see
and
you.
speak soon.
Come back next week.